Canada's top trade negotiators are in Washington this week as U.S. President Donald Trump once again bashes CUSMA. Here's what he had to say in a phone interview with Fox News this morning.
So the USMCA, are you looking to update that?
I don't care. I mean, I don't really want to. I'd rather be independent. Here's the thing. Mexico and Canada need us. We don't need them. The deal is important for them. It's not important for us.
I'm joined now by Maryscott Greenwood, founder of Ottawa Street Strategy in Washington. It's great to see you, and it's great to get your perspective on this, because we just heard President Trump saying he doesn't care about renewing CUSMA or USMCA, that the U.S. doesn't need Canada or Mexico. The president's position on that hasn't shifted in months. How do you negotiate with that?
You know, you got to remember, Peter, that Donald Trump is an old New York real estate guy, right? So if he is selling you a building, it is the most fabulous, glorious building that was ever created. And if he's buying that same building from you, it's a piece of garbage. And who would ever want it? You might as well tear it down. So that's just how he rolls. That's just one of his moves. And Canada and Mexico, know that.
You know, Jameson Greer said in the spring that, like, most of CUSMA's fine, that, he doesn't want to renegotiate it because you got to have some kind of a deal in place to govern the inordinate amount of trade done between these three countries, but that there are some specifics, ideals they need to sort of address, or issues they need to address. But the question I think I keep coming back to is, how do you square the rational stuff you hear from someone like Jameson Greer with that kind of rhetoric you hear from Donald Trump, when at the end of the day, the deal that's going to be signed, and Greer's been clear on this too, is going to have to start with an agreement between Mark Carney and Donald Trump?
Well, that's exactly right. At this particular moment in history, it really is on the leaders to negotiate. They've got talented people, both of them, on their teams. And Donald Trump has something right now that Mark Carney doesn't have, which is as much as people want to talk about the midterms, Trump isn't facing election. He doesn't need another mandate from the United States. And even if he did, he wouldn't, I don't think, care. Like, he's just operating like he can do whatever he wants. Prime Minister Carney, on the other hand, is still relatively new, still has to make sure that there's unity behind him in Canada, and Trump knows that, and Trump is looking for any advantage he can get.
You know, everybody keeps saying here that, it's 98 days until the midterms. And I keep responding by saying 911 days until Donald Trump finishes his term. The one thing might happen really soon, but Donald Trump is going to be president for a long time. We're going to have to do something. And your op-ed this morning that I hope everybody reads was really good. And I liked, you praised Canada's approach to the trade war. Even as Donald Trump is introducing a new round of tariffs, I wonder, in reading that, do you see Canada's restraint as a potential form of weakness, or seen as a potential weakness by those in the United States?
Well, the risk is that if Canada doesn't fully engage with President Trump and with the United States, that Mexico gets a deal and Canada gets left on the sidelines, but not just left on the sidelines. The risk is that Canada continues to receive not just insults, but things that are damaging economically to actually both countries. So that's the risk of not getting something across the finish line in a timely way. And I know that the Prime Minister of Canada and his team are focused like a laser on this. They don't need me or anybody else to tell them how important it is. But it is an unusual time in the United States, and Donald Trump is an unusual counterparty. What can we say?
Your piece makes it really clear. A war is a war, and Canada's in a war. Maybe not a shooting war, but a trade war. But in that war, Canada has leverage. You mentioned potash in particular as not something you need to say we're going to take off the table, but something to make clear is on the table. The other thing I hear people talk a lot about, when you look at the booze ban, that all of this U.S. alcohol not on sale in most of the provinces in Canada, I look through the list of stuff that Canadians buy, and it's, billions of dollars in fruits and vegetables, billions billions of dollars, $20 billion in consumer electronics that we buy from the United States. There are other points of leverage that we haven't really leaned on yet, right?
Canada has an inordinate amount of leverage, and there are pockets in the United States that are already feeling the pain of Canada pulling back. I mean, the tourism sector, the places where snowbirds go, are really feeling it. And the other thing that is so counterproductive about these tariffs for Americans is if these proposed tariffs go through, it's American consumers that will pay more. Things will become less affordable if you can't have Canadian inputs. And so it's damaging to Canada, but it's really damaging to the United States as well. And it's just so unnecessary, Peter.
So we have Dominic LeBlanc down in the United States this week with the chief trade negotiator, Janice Charette. Given the recent escalations, but factoring in what you're talking about now with the leverage Canada does have, what should they be doing? What should those meetings that they have, as you know, Carney says he and Trump have agreed to intensify the talks. What should the Canadians be coming to the table with here?
Well, I think it's going to be important to demonstrate that there's absolutely no daylight between the Prime Minister and his very talented team and, for example, the provinces and key businesses. So it's coming with a unified front, coming to say, Canada, we are in this together and we're prepared to kind of drop our gloves and put up our dukes if we have to. We don't want to, but we're prepared to. And making that case convincingly is what I think the negotiators are going to have to do.
We've had a couple of people on the show this week. One that kind of characterized the Canada-U.S. relationship as the early stages of a divorce, and one saying it's a summer breakup and they get back together in the fall. I wonder, when you look at the damage that's been done to the Canadian-U.S. relationship, but also the change in how a lot of American politicians are approaching trade and the reality that tariffs are probably going to be a feature on the economic landscape going forward, even after Donald Trump is in office. How do you see where Canada-U.S. relations are at and are headed, even in a post-Donald Trump world?
Well, you know, you can't divorce your next door neighbor. Like you can't. I mean, unless you move, and in this case, we can't move the continent. So it's an imperfect analogy. Look, relations are extraordinarily damaged, and it's really about trust. And I think the U.S. has lost the trust of Canada, and it takes years and years to build it back. It's worth building it for both. It's important to both Canada and the United States that the relationship not just get restored, but get renewed and built back even better. But I think it's going to take an awfully long time, Peter. I don't think people here in the United States, where I live, have a sense of the degree of the damage that's being done in the relationship. So it's going to take a lot. It's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of goodwill, and there isn't much goodwill right now. So we've got to rebuild it. It's doable. It's possible, but it's gonna take effort on both sides.
Always glad for your insights. Maryscott Greenwood, appreciate you coming on the show.
Thanks, Peter. Great to see you as always.
Time now for the Power Panel. Supriya Dwivedi was an advisor to former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Lisa Raitt is a former Conservative cabinet minister. And Nathan Cullen is a former NDP MP and BC NDP minister. Nice to see you all. Supriya, if I may start with you. It's so hard to square. On the one hand, Carney comes out and says after he spoke to the president that they're going to intensify talks, and then you've got the president on TV this morning saying, "I don't need it, I don't care." I lose track of what I'm supposed to square with what. How do you manage that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if any of us are actually faring any differently, Peter. I mean, look, I think it's good for Minister LeBlanc and our chief negotiator to be going down there and make whatever progress they can. But, you know, the entire backdrop of all this makes it very hard to be optimistic about any of it. Like, I'm not sure how anyone in this country can really pretend that Canada is being met in good faith on the other side of that negotiating table. And don't get me wrong, I'm fully aware that the president himself is, you know, not necessarily across that table, but this is quite obviously unhelpful. It is the kind of thing that he does and has been doing. So I guess we can't really be, you know, shocked or surprised here. But increasingly, I think the issue for this federal government is going to have to actually reckon with the notion that even if we do sign a deal with the U.S., well, who knows what it'll be worth, because Trump and the people around him have shown us at their word. And in the case of Trump himself, his signature doesn't really mean anything. And, you know, from my view, if the conservatives were smart, that's what they would really be honing in on, not the inability to necessarily secure a deal, but the fact that even with a deal, we're not necessarily guaranteed a ton of certainty, and the government owes it to Canadians as well as the private sector to perhaps be more forthcoming in terms of the status of negotiations and like what Canadians should be primed to expect.
And Lisa, we don't really know what LeBlanc and Charette are going to be doing, who they're meeting with this week. But I spent a good chunk of the last month down in D.C. trying to report out some of this stuff. And Jamieson Greer sort of keeps saying a couple of messages that I think need to resonate. One of them is, we kind of know the outline, like we know the things we got to work on, but we really can't do anything until the president and the prime minister agree on kind of the broad brushstrokes. How can you have these kind of technical conversations with the USTR until you have an agreement between Trump and Carney that they're going to agree on something down the road?
Well, I think the ground is well trod. I think we understand very clearly what are the things that the United States felt isn't working in CUSMA. I want to answer two questions so that may be helpful.
Right.
In terms of whether or not it's good to have a deal because Trump is going to break it anyway, I can tell you from the business point of view, having a contract that is actually something that's actionable should a party breach it gives good comfort to the business community. So it's worth it in the sense of going down and getting some kind of a deal. And the other side of it, in terms of what Donald Trump is saying, although he is saying we don't need anything from Canada, okay, that's fine. But we may be able to put a deal together where he gets to say, this is the best deal we've ever done. Look at all this extra stuff that I got from Canada that we didn't get before. I think there is a way for him to pivot into saying this is a good deal, should we be able to find it. So both arguments in terms of why do a deal, what are we getting from it, I think there's room for a narrative change for Mr. Trump if we do it right. And I also think that a deal is important to the Canadian business community.
And Nathan, we kind of know what the broad brushstrokes are, right? It's auto parts, it's rules of origin, especially around steel, it's dairy. Like on the actual what they're going to put into some kind of an MOU, I think we have a fairly good understanding of it. It's convincing Trump that it's politically feasible or good for him, right? Is that the job here?
You're talking details, Peter. Trump doesn't deal in details. He deals in meta-narratives and is he tough enough and is he winning? I think the recent experience with the Gordie Howe Bridge, which is finally opened, should be instructive. Lisa's got a point. That a deal has a psychological effect. I don't know what the commercial effect is. If the deal you're signing it with the partner constantly breaks it, doesn't respect it, didn't respect it when he was in the business community, and certainly doesn't respect it now that he's president. So the value of the deal also indicates how much you're willing to concede to get to a deal. And I think Canada's experience so far is we've made concession after concession. It hasn't really gotten us anywhere significant, I would argue, just more threats of more tariffs. And as somebody coming from the West Coast and seeing the softwood lumber issue play out way beyond Trump, just over decades, right, where tens of thousands of workers have lost their jobs, Americans keep doing this, we have to think about Canadian workers. And I'm not sure that Mr. Carney at this point, and given the tensions at the Premier's table as to how would he counteract whatever it is the Americans plan to do, how do we protect Canadian workers and families and the anxieties that they're feeling, real or perceived, with the effects of Mr. Trump?
I want to talk about what leverage Canada has in this. You know, the booze ban is a thorn in the side of this, but it is clearly causing a reaction in the United States. The tourism ban is clearly biting. Supriya, what are the other points of leverage? Is it, $1 billion in seafood or $2 billion in vegetables, or consumer electronics is like $22 billion of goods? Where else do we have leverage that we aren't perhaps leaning on just now?
Well, I mean, this came up during the Premier's meeting, right, with, Premier Ford basically suggesting that everything's on the table, including perhaps energy or potash. I don't know. I can certainly understand why Premier Smith closed the door on that very quickly, right? And saying like, absolutely not, that's not something they're going to do. So, I mean, those are certainly, levers, I guess, we have at our disposal. But then, that leads to a whole different set of questions is, are we willing to make, regular Americans kind of pay with rolling blackouts because of the irresponsibility of their government right now? So I don't think that's a road we want to go down. It's certainly something that I'm sure is being talked about, at least in some circles. Definitely in the Premier's office here in Ontario, it's been floated around. So I mean, that remains to be seen. But I mean, the booze alone seems to really be sticking in their craw in an interesting way, as is, the tourism hit. Like this is, and a lot of the tourism hit, they're not necessarily coming from these like very blue areas. A lot of them are coming from purple states. A lot of them are coming from red states. And the more that you have on the ground rank and file kind of Republican local folks filling up that message, filtering up that message that, their local economies are hurting, it's certainly making a difference, I'd say.
And Lisa, when we talk about leverage, I feel like there's this all or nothing approach to it, that it's either turn off the electricity taps and ban the export of potash or do nothing. But as Supriya points out, the booze ban is working or having an impact. I don't know if it's working, but it's having an impact. The tourism is having an impact. What are the other things that we, like us, we, the consumers that buy stuff from America every day, what can we be doing that aren't necessarily big government sweeping actions that would get us in further trouble?
Well, it's nothing in the short term, Peter. That's
right.
The problem. What we can be doing is creating an economy that pivots away from the United States. And I think that's what the intent is. Remember, CUSMA is done. OK, we have CUSMA. It's going to be in place for 10 years. The United States did not want to do the extension. Fine, it's still in place. What we're really talking about is trying to get rid of those tariffs that have to do with national security on auto parts, steel, aluminum, softwood lumber, and then try to stop any of these new tariffs coming in on basically almost everything, $24 billion worth of goods that are threatened to come at the end of August. That is what's being negotiated at the table right now. To your point about booze, I think booze is a great point for American politicians to talk to their constituents about. Can you believe Canada's treating us so unfairly? I think it works for them in a sense, and it gives us a sense of pride. But I would not bargain that this is something that is at the negotiating table of when are you going to let this booze ban come out? I don't think this is part of the negotiation on the other big tariffs. I think it's rules of origin, as you pointed out. And other matters.
Indeed. All right, Nathan, the booze stuff is really interesting because the response we're getting from the latest Trump salvo on 50% is hitting Canadian booze, and a lot of that's coming from BC. How concerned are people in BC going to be about what impact this has if they go ahead in 22 days or whatever it is?
Yes and no. I mean, yeah, Americans buy quite a bit of the fantastic wines and other products that come out of British Columbia. I just like that we get to talk about booze so much on Canada's national network. This is thrilling for me. Speaking to what people care about deeply every day. But interesting polling to Lisa's last point coming out of the States, attitudes of Canadians towards Americans have soured dramatically, and that's true globally. China is seen as much more of a positive force in the world than America is today, globally. But the reverse isn't true. Americans aren't souring on Canadians, because any American politician that says, gosh darn those Canadians, look what they're doing, the average American say, well, why? Why would they do that? And it's like, well, we're hitting them with illegal tariffs over and over and over again. We're threatening to take over their country. We're just rude. Our president is rude, and the Canadians have had enough. I'm kind of surprised at how little effect this latest threat of tariffs has had. And maybe it's a bit of, you get a bit fatigued by this round after threats of tariffs. This is meant to give Trump his bargaining position for a deal he says he doesn't care about. It's just amazing to me that this is supposed to be a pro-business president who's doing nothing but hurting the American consumer every step of the way, starting a war in the Middle East that he can't get his way out of. I mean, time is on Canada's side, actually. We get to the midterms, things are going to change. And I can just imagine Dominic LeBlanc is skating back and forth across the ice down in Washington, buying a bit more time. I don't think there's a great urgency on Canada's side that I can tell to settle a deal, because again, you're settling a deal with an empowered president who's a bit nuts. It gets a lot better come November in terms of strengthening Canada's hand. And that seems to be in part of the playbook, at least for Mr. Carney from day one.
Supriya, real quick from you before we take a break. It's 98 days to the midterms, but it's 900 plus days to the end of his term. And I think they know that we're trying to play for time.
Thanks for bringing us down, Peter.
I worry that they will see that play and double down. What's your take?
Yeah, of course. And like, apologies to Lisa, because I'm going to steal something that she said, I think it was about 2 or 3 weeks ago. But even if the midterms do flip in the Democrats' favor, I mean, I don't know that we're necessarily going to be receiving a ton of like a 180 in terms of their position. It's not as though Democrats aren't also incredibly protectionist and can kind of screw us over when they want to. So I'm certainly optimistic, and I hold Nathan's cautious optimism that if we wait out till November, we can get a change in play, at least to some degree. But I don't expect this to be like the number one thing on the Democratic agenda.